The most dangerous mistake a person can make is believing dignity has to introduce itself before it deserves respect. The marble steps of the James R. Browning Federal Courthouse glowed beneath the cool light of an early autumn morning as lawyers hurried through the revolving doors with leather briefcases tucked beneath their arms, and deputy marshals exchanged quiet greetings before another busy day began. Washington, D.C. had barely shaken off the morning chill, yet the courthouse already carried the familiar weight of expectation, where careers could change with a single ruling and reputations could disappear before lunchtime. Officer Daniel Brooks adjusted the radio clip to his shoulder as he scanned every face entering the security checkpoint. After nearly 18 years wearing a badge, he believed he could judge people within seconds. To him, confidence looked suspicious when it appeared in the wrong person, and silence often seemed like defiance. That morning his attention locked onto a woman walking alone across the polished lobby floor. She wore a charcoal gray suit beneath a neatly folded overcoat, carried a slim leather portfolio, and moved with the calm, measured pace of someone who never felt the need to rush. Her natural curls framed a composed face untouched by anxiety, and although dozens of people passed around her, she acknowledged each courthouse employee with nothing more than a warm smile and a quiet nod. Her name was Naomi Carter, but Daniel had never seen her before, and in his mind that was enough to begin forming conclusions. As she approached the restricted hallway leading toward the federal courtrooms, Daniel stepped directly into her path and raised one hand. "Ma'am, this area isn't open to the public." Naomi stopped immediately. She neither protested nor looked offended. Instead, she offered the same calm expression she had carried since entering the building. "Good morning, officer," she replied gently. "I'm expected upstairs." Daniel glanced briefly at the leather portfolio before looking back at her face. Everybody says they're expected somewhere. A few attorneys slowed their pace, exchanging uncertain looks before continuing toward the elevators. Naomi remained perfectly still. "If you'll allow me just a moment, I can explain." Daniel folded his arms. "You can explain after you tell me why you ignored the signs." She glanced toward the hallway, then back at him. "I wasn't ignoring them." Her voice never rose above a respectful conversation. "I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." Something about her confidence irritated him more than if she had argued. In his experience, people either apologized or became defensive. She did neither. Around them, courthouse employees quietly watched while pretending not to notice. A clerk carrying a stack of case files slowed for a split second before lowering his eyes and walking away. A security supervisor emerged from a nearby office, recognized Naomi instantly, and instinctively took one step forward before stopping, uncertainty spreading across his face as Daniel continued questioning her. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Conversations faded. Elevator doors opened and closed without anyone speaking. Even the steady echo of footsteps across the marble floor seemed quieter than before. Naomi simply waited, patient enough to let silence fill the growing tension. Then she looked directly at Daniel with steady eyes that carried neither fear nor anger, and asked in an almost conversational tone, "Officer Brooks, are you absolutely certain you want to continue down this path?" He answered with a faint, dismissive smile, completely unaware that within the next hour, every assumption he had just made would follow him into the very courtroom where his own future was about to be decided. Daniel Brooks let out a quiet laugh that carried farther than he intended, and several people in the lobby instinctively looked away instead of toward him. Years inside federal buildings had taught them an unwritten rule. When tension appeared near a security checkpoint, the safest place to stand was somewhere else. Naomi Carter noticed the movement without turning her head. She simply rested one hand on the leather portfolio against her side and waited as though time itself worked for her instead of against her. Daniel interpreted her silence as stubbornness. "I asked you a simple question," he said, taking another step closer while maintaining a professional distance. "Who authorized you to be in this hallway?" Naomi answered with the same measured tone that never seemed to change. "The authorization is already on file." Daniel gave a skeptical smile. "Then it should not be difficult for you to prove it." Before Naomi could respond, a young courthouse clerk emerged from around the corner carrying several folders. The moment he recognized her, surprise crossed his face. "Excuse me, officer, I think there may be." Daniel raised his hand before the sentence could finish. This is a security matter. Keep moving. The clerk hesitated for only a second before continuing down the corridor, glancing back with visible concern. Naomi watched him disappear without saying a word. Around them, conversations became quieter. Two attorneys waiting near the elevators exchanged uncertain looks after recognizing Naomi, but neither interrupted. One whispered something under his breath before checking his watch as though calculating how much time remained before the morning session began. Daniel noticed none of it. His attention remained fixed on the woman standing before him with remarkable composure. "Please place your portfolio on the inspection table," he instructed. Naomi did exactly as requested. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were neatly organized legal documents, a fountain pen, reading glasses, and a leather notebook embossed with a simple set of initials. Everything appeared ordinary, yet he continued searching as though convinced something had to justify his suspicions. Naomi waited patiently while the seconds stretched into nearly a full minute. Finally, she spoke again. "Officer Brooks, there are people expecting the proceedings to begin on schedule." Daniel closed the portfolio with deliberate slowness. "That depends on whether everyone follows procedure." Naomi nodded once. "Procedure matters. I agree with you completely." Her answer caught him off guard because it contained no frustration, no sarcasm, and no attempt to challenge his authority. It was simply an observation. A security supervisor appeared at the far end of the lobby, immediately recognizing Naomi from a distance. His expression changed almost instantly, but before he could approach, another deputy quietly touched his arm and whispered something into his ear. Both men stopped where they stood, uncertain whether stepping in would improve the situation or make it worse. The courthouse seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere above them, the deep chime of the building clock echoed through the marble corridors, marking the hour when the first federal session was scheduled to begin. Lawyers began walking toward courtroom 3 with increasing urgency. Naomi glanced briefly at the clock before returning her attention to Daniel. "You still have time to make this morning very different from the way it is about to unfold," she said softly. Daniel folded his arms again, convinced the warning was nothing more than an attempt to pressure him into stepping aside. With complete confidence, he replied, "The only thing unfolding today is that everyone follows my instructions before they go any farther." Behind him, the polished brass doors leading to the courtroom slowly opened, and a court officer stepped into the hallway with an expression that suggested someone important had not yet arrived. The court officer paused just inside the brass doors, scanning the lobby with growing concern before his eyes settled on Naomi Carter. Relief appeared across his face for the briefest moment, but it vanished when he realized she was still standing at the security checkpoint. He started walking toward her with measured steps until Daniel Brooks shifted slightly into his path, without even looking away from Naomi. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked. The court officer answered politely, "I only need a quick word with the lady." Daniel shook his head. "She is being screened. It can wait." The officer glanced toward Naomi, silently hoping she would correct the misunderstanding herself. Instead, she offered the slightest smile, almost as if she wanted to see what choice everyone in the room would make when given the opportunity to do the right thing. The officer nodded once and quietly stepped back. Another minute passed. The digital clock above the entrance rolled forward. 8:30 sharp. Somewhere beyond the heavy courtroom doors, chairs scraped against polished wood as attorneys organized their files and spectators settled into the gallery. Every passing second increased the pressure inside the building. Naomi looked toward the hallway before returning her attention to Daniel. "There are many people depending on this morning beginning on time," she said gently. Daniel answered without hesitation. "Then they can wait until I finish doing my job." Naomi inclined her head with genuine respect. "Doing your job is important. So is recognizing when your assumptions deserve another look." Daniel gave a short laugh. "My assumptions have kept this courthouse safe for years." Nearby, an older attorney quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. He had argued cases in federal court for more than 2 decades, and he had never witnessed silence spread through a courthouse quite like this. Several deputy marshals exchanged uneasy glances. None of them appeared comfortable, yet none chose to interrupt. They understood chain of command, but they also understood that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. Daniel picked up Naomi's leather notebook and turned it over in his hands. Embossed on the cover were the initials N.C. in understated gold lettering. Nothing more. Traveling light today, he asked. Only what I need, Naomi replied. That is usually enough. Her calm answer somehow irritated him even more. He was accustomed to emotional reactions because emotions confirmed his authority. Calmness offered him nothing to push against. It forced him to fill the silence himself. You know, Daniel continued, most people cooperate without making this difficult. Naomi met his eyes steadily. I have cooperated with every request you have made. Daniel realized she was right. She had followed every instruction immediately. She had not argued. She had not raised her voice. She had not challenged him. Yet something still convinced him he had to prove a point. Before he could speak again, a discreet tone echoed through the courthouse public address system, followed by a calm announcement. Good morning. Court will convene in 5 minutes. The words lingered in the air. The attorneys waiting nearby instinctively looked toward Naomi. The court officer near the brass doors checked his watch once more, concern now impossible to hide. Naomi took a slow breath and spoke with quiet certainty. Officer Brooks, every decision becomes part of a larger story. Sometimes we understand that story only after it is too late to change the opening chapter. Daniel dismissed the remark with a confident smile, never imagining that the next set of doors he walked through would transform every certainty he believed he carried with him. The court officer took another careful step forward before stopping once more, his attention shifting from Daniel Brooks to the hallway behind him where more courthouse staff had quietly gathered. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody challenged the situation directly. Instead, an unusual silence settled across the marble lobby, the kind of silence that appears only when experienced professionals recognize that a single decision is about to change the course of an entire day. Daniel interpreted their hesitation as confirmation that he was in complete control. Naomi Carter interpreted it very differently. She understood that everyone present was weighing responsibility against protocol, wondering whether intervening would help or only deepen an unnecessary misunderstanding. She remained exactly where she stood, her posture relaxed and her expression composed. Daniel looked around at the growing audience and spoke with even greater confidence. This will only take another minute. No one answered him. An assistant from the clerk of court's office emerged carrying a folder marked with the seal of the United States District Court. The young woman recognized Naomi instantly, her eyes widening before she quickly lowered them. Officer, she began cautiously, there is someone who is expected. Daniel interrupted before she could finish. I appreciate your concern, but security decisions stay with security personnel. The assistant hesitated, then quietly nodded and stepped away without another word. Naomi watched the exchange. With calm understanding, she could see the discomfort on every face surrounding them. Some people looked toward the courtroom doors. Others glanced at the clock. Every passing second pushed the morning schedule closer to disruption. Yet she refused to embarrass anyone by announcing who she was. Respect, she believed, should never depend on a title spoken aloud. Daniel closed the portfolio and handed it back. Everything seems ordinary, he admitted, but something still does not add up. Naomi accepted the portfolio with steady hands. Sometimes what does not add up is simply a story we have already decided to believe. Daniel frowned. You enjoy speaking in riddles. Not at all, Naomi replied. I simply believe first impressions deserve a second review. Those words lingered in the air. An older deputy marshal standing near the entrance quietly exchanged a look with the court officer. Both men had worked in the federal system long enough to recognize Judge Carter's remarkable patience. Under different circumstances, this misunderstanding would have ended within seconds. Instead, she had chosen restraint, allowing every person present the opportunity to reveal something about their own character through their choices. The public address system sounded once again. Court will convene in 2 minutes. The announcement echoed through the polished corridors like a gentle reminder that time could not be paused forever. Attorneys carrying thick case binders began moving more quickly toward the courtroom entrance, but many slowed as they passed, stealing one last uncertain glance at Naomi before disappearing through the brass doors. Daniel noticed their expressions, yet misunderstood them completely. He assumed they were impressed by his diligence rather than puzzled by his persistence. Naomi finally looked toward the courtroom entrance, then back at Daniel with the same quiet kindness she had shown from the beginning. Officer Brooks, she said softly. Every courthouse is built on the same foundation. Not marble, not steel. Trust. Once trust is tested, every person inside the building becomes part of the outcome. Daniel answered with unwavering confidence. Then, everyone will see that I followed procedure. Naomi offered a small, almost sympathetic smile. Yes, she said. Very soon, everyone will see exactly what happened this morning. At that exact moment, the heavy courtroom doors opened once again, and this time the courtroom deputy stepped into the hallway carrying a stack of official case files, his eyes searching the lobby with unmistakable urgency, as though the one person capable of beginning the day's most important proceeding had still not arrived. The courtroom deputy walked briskly across the polished floor, holding a stack of case files against his chest, as though every passing second carried greater weight than the one before it. He stopped several feet from Daniel Brooks and offered a courteous smile that barely concealed his concern. Officer, we are about to begin the morning session. I need to speak with this lady for just a moment. Daniel remained unmoved. She will be available after I finish verifying everything. The deputy looked toward Naomi Carter, silently searching for permission to explain. She answered with the smallest shake of her head, encouraging patience instead of interruption. It was a gesture almost nobody noticed except the deputy himself. He understood immediately. She was allowing events to unfold naturally. She wanted every decision to belong to the people making it. The deputy stepped back without another word. Around the lobby, courthouse employees exchanged uncertain glances. Some recognized the significance of the moment, while others simply sensed that the atmosphere had become unusually heavy. No raised voices echoed through the marble corridors. No arguments broke the silence. There was only anticipation, as though the building itself were waiting for something inevitable. Daniel interpreted every quiet face as proof that he was demonstrating excellent judgment. In truth, many of those watching were asking themselves the same uncomfortable question. How could someone stand so confidently at the center of a misunderstanding without noticing every warning surrounding him? Naomi adjusted the strap of her portfolio and looked briefly toward the tall windows overlooking Constitution Avenue. Morning sunlight spilled across the courthouse floor, reflecting against the polished stone with remarkable clarity. She had spent years inside courtrooms where lives changed because people chose assumptions over facts. That lesson had never left her. She turned back to Daniel with the same calm expression that had never wavered since entering the building. Officer Brooks, she said quietly, there is still an opportunity for today to become an example of professionalism instead of regret. Daniel answered almost immediately. Regret comes from ignoring procedure. I am following it. Naomi nodded respectfully. Procedure is strongest when it is guided by fairness. The words lingered between them. An elderly man seated near the public waiting area lowered the newspaper in his hands. A young law student standing beside the elevators quietly stopped taking notes. Even two maintenance workers paused beside their equipment, sensing that something important was unfolding despite not knowing exactly what it was. The courthouse clock marked another minute. Inside the courtroom, the muffled sound of chairs moving into place drifted through the heavy doors. The schedule could not pause forever. Yet the person everyone was waiting for remained standing in the lobby, patiently allowing another individual every chance to reconsider his choices. Daniel glanced toward the courtroom entrance for only a moment before returning his attention to Naomi. You seem unusually calm for someone being delayed. She answered with a gentle smile. Calm is easier when you know the truth does not become weaker simply because it has to wait. Daniel dismissed the remark as another clever response. What he failed to notice was that nearly every experienced attorney walking past lowered their voices the moment they recognized Naomi. None greeted her aloud. None announced her identity. They merely acknowledged her with quiet respect before continuing inside. Their silence was not uncertainty. It was trust. They believed that dignity did not require an audience. As the final attorneys disappeared beyond the brass doors, a single bell echoed softly through the courthouse, signaling that the morning session was overdue to begin. The courtroom deputy looked once more toward Naomi, then toward the bench waiting inside, fully aware that within moments the carefully guarded identity of the woman standing before Officer Brooks would no longer remain unknown. The courtroom deputy stopped only a few feet from Naomi Carter, drawing one careful breath before speaking with unmistakable respect. "Ma'am, everyone is ready." Daniel Brooks answered before Naomi could respond. "She will not be going anywhere until I finish here." The deputy hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Officer Brooks, the schedule cannot move forward without." He stopped himself, choosing his next words with extraordinary care. Naomi gave him a reassuring look that seemed to say everything without a single sentence. "Be patient. Let this moment finish on its own." The deputy nodded and quietly stepped aside once more. Daniel watched him leave with complete confidence, convinced he had prevented someone from bypassing courthouse security. He had no idea that nearly every person standing within sight now understood far more about the situation than he did. The lobby had become almost perfectly silent. Attorneys stood beside the courtroom entrance holding thick case binders against their sides. Deputy marshals remained near the walls without speaking. Administrative staff paused outside their offices, pretending to organize paperwork while carefully observing what unfolded before them. No one wanted to interfere. No one wanted to disrespect the dignity Naomi had maintained from the very beginning. The building itself seemed suspended between one moment and the next. Naomi glanced once more toward the courtroom doors before returning her attention to Daniel. "Officer Brooks," she said gently, "every position carries responsibility. The higher the responsibility, the greater the need for humility." Daniel answered with the certainty that had guided him throughout his career. "Humility does not keep federal buildings secure. Rules do." Naomi smiled faintly. "Rules protect institutions. Fairness protects justice." Those words settled over the marble lobby with remarkable weight. Daniel dismissed them with another confident expression, never noticing that several senior attorneys quietly lowered their eyes. They had argued before Naomi many times. They recognized her calm voice immediately. They also recognized something else. She had been given countless opportunities to reveal her identity and end the misunderstanding within seconds, yet she had deliberately chosen restraint. She was allowing character, not authority, to speak first. The courthouse clock advanced another minute. From inside the courtroom came the soft sound of papers being arranged across counsel tables. The gallery doors closed. Every participant had taken a seat except one. The judge's bench remained empty. Daniel finally gestured toward the courtroom entrance. "Who exactly is everyone waiting for?" The deputy answered carefully. "The presiding judge, officer." Daniel nodded as though the answer changed nothing. "Then I suppose the judge can wait another minute." A ripple of astonishment passed silently through the nearby staff. Nobody corrected him. Nobody announced Naomi's name. They simply watched the final pieces fall into place. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly before looking back at Daniel with genuine kindness rather than frustration. "Time has a way of revealing what introductions never could," she said. Before Daniel could respond, the courtroom deputy received a message through his earpiece. His posture straightened immediately. He stepped toward the open courtroom doors and spoke in a clear, professional voice that echoed through the marble hallway. "Court is now in session. All rise." Instantly, every attorney, deputy marshal, clerk, and spectator inside the courtroom stood to their feet. Naomi calmly lifted her portfolio, walked past Daniel without the slightest trace of anger or triumph, and crossed the threshold into the courtroom as dozens of people turned toward her with unmistakable respect, leaving Daniel frozen in place as the realization he had unknowingly postponed the arrival of the very person everyone had been waiting for began to settle over him. Daniel Brooks remained near the courtroom entrance, unable to understand why every person inside had risen to their feet the instant Naomi Carter crossed the threshold. His confidence did not disappear all at once. Instead, it dissolved one quiet moment at a time. He watched as the courtroom deputy accepted Naomi's leather portfolio with careful respect. Another clerk stepped forward and handed her a neatly prepared folder bearing the official seal of the court. Nobody spoke unnecessarily. Every movement was deliberate. Every expression reflected the same unmistakable regard. Daniel instinctively took 2 slow steps toward the doorway, stopping just outside, as though an invisible line had suddenly appeared beneath his feet. Naomi continued forward without hesitation, her pace unchanged from the moment she first entered the courthouse that morning. She climbed the short set of steps leading to the bench, paused for only a heartbeat, and placed one hand lightly upon the polished wood before taking her seat. The courtroom remained standing. The silence inside the room carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. Then the courtroom deputy announced in a clear, measured tone, "The Honorable Judge Naomi Carter presiding." The words echoed through the chamber with remarkable clarity. Daniel felt the color drain from his face. His eyes widened as every conversation from the lobby replayed in his mind with painful precision. The warnings, the respectful glances, the attorneys who had quietly stepped aside, the deputy who had repeatedly tried to reach her. The simple sentence she had spoken more than once. There was still time to choose differently. He understood all of it now. Only now it was far too late to change the opening chapter. Inside the courtroom, Judge Carter looked across the room with complete composure. She acknowledged counsel for both parties, greeted the court staff, and thanked everyone for their patience after the unexpected delay. Her voice carried neither resentment nor triumph. There was only professionalism. The gallery slowly returned to their seats after the deputy instructed them to be seated. Daniel remained standing near the entrance, almost uncertain whether he belonged inside the room at all. The deputy marshal beside him quietly leaned closer and whispered, "Officer Brooks, you should take your assigned position." Daniel nodded almost automatically. Every step toward his post felt heavier than the one before it. He avoided looking toward the bench, but sooner or later his eyes met Judge Carter's. She did not glare at him. She did not embarrass him before the courtroom. She simply acknowledged him with the same calm expression she had shown since the beginning of the morning. That quiet dignity unsettled him far more than anger ever could have. As the clerk began reading the docket, Daniel finally noticed the title printed across the first case folder resting on counsel table. The proceeding scheduled for that morning involved allegations of repeated professional misconduct by a federal courthouse security officer. His heartbeat quickened. He recognized his own name typed clearly on the first page. For the first time since putting on his uniform that morning, certainty abandoned him completely. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the bench once more, realizing that the woman he had delayed, questioned, and underestimated was not simply presiding over a courtroom. She was presiding over the very proceeding that would determine the future of his career, and despite everything that had happened only minutes earlier, she prepared to begin exactly as every judge is sworn to begin, not with emotion, not with personal grievance, but with an unwavering commitment to fairness, impartiality, and the rule of law. Judge Naomi Carter allowed the courtroom to settle before speaking. Her voice was steady, measured, and free from any trace of personal emotion. "Good morning. This court is convened to examine the facts presented before it and to ensure that every participant receives the fairness guaranteed under the law." Those simple words filled the room with a quiet authority that came not from volume, but from principle. Daniel Brooks stood at his assigned position, unable to separate the woman he had questioned in the lobby from the judge now presiding over the proceeding. He searched her expression for resentment, for disappointment, for some indication that the events outside the courtroom would influence what happened next. He found none. The prosecutor rose first, thanking the court before outlining the purpose of the hearing. The matter before the court concerned a pattern of alleged professional misconduct, complaints that had accumulated over several years, and questions about whether established procedures had been applied consistently and impartially. Judge Carter listened without interruption, occasionally making a brief note in the margin of the file before her. She asked only precise questions, each one directed toward understanding facts rather than assigning blame. When the first witness was called, the testimony focused on documented procedures, official reports, and courthouse protocols. There were no dramatic accusations, only carefully presented information supported by records. Each answer was delivered under oath, each document identified before being admitted into the record. Daniel listened as familiar dates and routine assignments slowly formed a larger picture than he had ever considered. Actions that had once seemed ordinary when viewed one at a time appeared very different when placed side by side across several years. Then the prosecutor requested permission to introduce security footage recorded that very morning. A large monitor illuminated beside the witness stand. The courtroom remained completely silent as the video began. The recording showed the courthouse lobby exactly as it had appeared less than an hour earlier. It captured Naomi's arrival, the respectful attempts by courthouse staff to reach her, and every opportunity Daniel had been given to reconsider his assumptions. The recording contained no sensational moment. It needed none. The quiet confidence with which conclusions had been reached before questions were fully asked spoke more loudly than raised voices ever could. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment before looking back at the screen. For the first time, he was not watching the encounter from inside his own certainty. He was seeing it through the perspective of everyone else who had witnessed it. The prosecutor finished presenting the recording and returned to counsel table without adding unnecessary commentary. Judge Carter looked toward Daniel briefly before addressing the courtroom. The purpose of evidence is not to humiliate anyone. It is to help the court understand what occurred as accurately as possible. Her words changed the atmosphere immediately. They reminded every person present that this proceeding was not about revenge. It was about accountability, grounded in fairness. Daniel slowly realized that the greatest contrast between himself and the woman on the bench was not authority. Both had held positions of responsibility that morning. The difference was how each had chosen to exercise it. As the next witness prepared to testify, the courtroom grew quiet once again, and for the first time in many years, Daniel understood that the most difficult judgment he would face that day was not the one waiting at the bench. It was the one forming within his own conscience. The courtroom moved forward with quiet discipline as each witness completed testimony, supported by official records rather than emotion. Judge Naomi Carter listened carefully, occasionally asking a single clarifying question before allowing the examination to continue. Every decision reflected the same principle she had demonstrated from the moment she entered the courthouse that morning. Facts deserved patience. Conclusions deserved evidence. Assumptions deserved scrutiny. Daniel Brooks remained still at his assigned position, but internally the certainty that had defined his career continued to unravel. As additional reports were presented, he recognized familiar incidents that he had long dismissed as isolated misunderstandings. Viewed together, they revealed a pattern that had never seemed visible while he was living it one decision at a time. The courtroom was not condemning him because of one difficult morning. It was examining whether repeated choices had reflected the impartial standards expected of someone entrusted with public responsibility. When the final witness concluded, Judge Carter reviewed several pages of notes before looking toward counsel. Does either party have additional evidence to present? Both attorneys answered that the record was complete. The courtroom became remarkably still. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, stretching across the polished wood floor and reminding everyone that outside the courthouse the ordinary rhythm of the city continued, even as lives inside this room quietly changed direction. Judge Carter folded her hands together. The responsibility of this court is not to determine whether mistakes are possible. Every person who serves the public is capable of making mistakes. The responsibility of this court is to determine whether those mistakes reveal a failure to uphold the standards required by the office entrusted to that individual. She paused long enough for every word to settle. Authority exists to protect equal justice, never to replace it. Daniel slowly lifted his eyes toward the bench. For the first time that morning, he was no longer thinking about defending his pride. He was thinking about the people who had stood before him over the years expecting fairness simply because fairness was what the uniform represented. Judge Carter continued speaking with the same composed professionalism. The evidence presented today demonstrates repeated lapses in judgment that require meaningful accountability. Accordingly, this court orders disciplinary action consistent with federal employment regulations, mandatory retraining regarding impartial professional conduct, and continued administrative review before full responsibilities may be restored. Her ruling was firm without being vindictive. It protected the integrity of the institution while leaving room for genuine growth. She then looked directly at Daniel. There was no anger in her expression, only honesty. Officer Brooks, every person who enters this courthouse deserves to be seen before they are judged. Titles can command respect, but dignity should never have to. Daniel stood silently for several moments before answering in a voice quieter than anyone had heard from him that day. Your Honor, I understand. Those two words carried more weight than any lengthy explanation could have. The hearing concluded. The deputy announced that court was adjourned, and everyone slowly rose from their seats. As attorneys gathered, their files and spectators departed, Daniel remained where he was for one final moment. Watching Judge Carter leave the bench with the same calm humility she had shown when she first walked through the courthouse doors carrying nothing more than a leather portfolio and the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce her importance. He finally understood that morning had never been about discovering who she was. It had been about discovering who he had become. Sometimes justice does not arrive with raised voices or dramatic victories. Sometimes it simply places a mirror before a person and gives them the rare opportunity to become better than the reflection staring back.